Hello everyone, this is Mr. Miller back again with you this week. Last week we talked about the characteristics of amphibians. This week we are going to take a closer look at one type of amphibian, the frog. When we are doing dissections in 7th grade, we typically use either tree frogs or the leopard frog. The leopard frog, you can see here, has these spots on the back. These would be filled in with melanin. Melanin is a substance that can fill in and expand, and this will allow the frog to actually camouflage in its environment a little bit better. Now, if we take a look here, this is the dorsal side of the frog, and of course that's what would be visible if the frog is on land. Now, if the frog is in the water, it's going to have the ventral side exposed down below the water, and this color will allow it to blend into the sky in case there's a predator in the water down below it. It will look up and maybe this should blend in with the sky. If we take a look at the bullfrog here, the bullfrog has some hind limbs that are very, very muscular. Most frogs will have muscular hind limbs, much more muscular than those of the toad, because the toad does more walking and hopping, whereas the frog does a lot more jumping. And then the front limbs here, or the forelimbs, are less muscular, and they are used to soften the landing. Now, if we were to take a look at the feet on those legs, you can see here the feet on the hind legs are webbed for swimming. They look almost like the flippers of, that you would wear in a swimming pool. And then if we look at the front limbs are actually one way to determine whether it's a male or a female. If it's a male frog on the forelimb feet, they're going to have enlarged thumb pads, and that's for the male to grasp onto the female during mating. If we take a look at the face of the frog, you're going to see the tympanic membrane, or the eardrum, up here. This tympanic membrane detects sounds and vibrations. It's going to be a little bit larger than the eye. And in bullfrogs, it's very large. In the tree frogs and leopard frogs, it's a bit smaller. And then we have the nostrils right here. The nostrils, also known as nares. In this case, these will be the external nares. We're also going to see inside the mouth that they have internal nares. But that's for bringing air in for respiration. So let's take a look at the bulging eyes here. The bulging eyes have a third eyelid called a nictitating membrane. Now, as humans, we actually still have the vestigial remains of that nictitating membrane. If you look at the corner of your eye, you'll see a little piece of tissue there, and that is we probably used as our nictitating membrane long ago. So I do have a crocodile here. I want you to watch this video quickly. The crocodile nictitating membrane. See that nictitating membrane moving across there very quickly? Let's watch it again here in this slow motion of this toad here. You can actually see it twice here. There it goes one time. And look closely. You can actually see how clear that nictitating membrane is, so it acts like a pair of goggles for under the water. So many reptiles have this, many birds, and a few mammals have them as well. If we take a look at the inside of the mouth of the frog, we'll find that they have some maxillary teeth along their upper jaw here. These would actually be difficult to see. They're actually easier to feel. So if we were doing an actual dissection, I would have you take your fingers along here, and it would feel almost like sandpaper. And this is for grasping prey. Then we have these two other teeth here. These are called vomerine teeth. Vomerine teeth are pointed inward, and when the tongue catches some prey and pulls it back here into the mouth, the prey is going to try to struggle to get away, and they're going to run into these pointy vomerine teeth. So you got to be careful when you're touching those during the dissection, because they can be quite pointy sometimes. So let's take a look at the tongue. The tongue is attached at the front lower jaw, and it's stretchy to catch prey. So let's take a look at this video here quickly. Okay, and they close their eyes to help push that food down that gullet. So let's talk about the gullet here in just a minute. If we take a look at the inside a little closer, we'll see that there's the internal nares, which are the nostrils here, the opening to the inside of the mouth. And then we have the eustachian tubes down here. Now, if any of you have ever been up in a plane before, you know your ears clog up as you go up into the atmosphere, and that's because of the pressure changes on the outside of the ear and the inside of the ear. So sometimes to equalize that pressure, we move our jaw around or we chew gum. Well, the frog does the same thing when he's under the water. It needs to equalize that pressure, that water pressure on the outside and the inside, and the eustachian tubes help the frog to do that, to equalize that pressure. Right here is an opening called the glottis. Now that air that comes in through those internal nares will actually be then forced down into the glottis and down into the lungs. And right above the glottis is a horizontal opening known as the gullet, and that takes food to the stomach. So as those eyes push in and that tongue brings that food back, it helps to swallow it and push it down into that gullet. So let's take a look at these pieces here. So here we have a frog, right? And what we would typically do is first thing we'd look at is that nictitating membrane right in through here. And then we have the tympanic membrane, which is the eardrum. We can take a look at the front forelimbs, which are not webbed, and then the hind limbs, which are webbed. And then we can take a look. These are the external nares or nostrils. And then if we're doing a dissection, we're going to typically take the scissors and we're going to make little incisions at each side of the frog's jaw. And then we can flop that open and we can take a look at the internal structures of the mouth. Here at the center of the frog, we have the the gullet, which is going to take the food down. And then right below the gullet is the glottis, and that's going to carry the air down to the lungs. And if we take a look, there's going to be a little stretchy piece back there because the tongue itself is actually attached to the front of the mouth, but it has a little piece back there where it's attached at too, and that stretches out and allows that tongue to stretch out really far and pull that right back into the gullet. Then if we take a look up here, we'll see those opening to the eustachian tubes, and they would lead right out to the tympanum. And the tympanum, of course, is the eardrums, and that's there to equalize that air pressure. Then if we go along the top of the roof of the mouth there, we can see the maxillary teeth. Now, they're very difficult to see. And then we have the vomerine teeth, which are in between those internal nares, those internal openings that we have to the external nares. So let's go over that one more time here. We have the internal nares. We have the eustachian tube openings. We have the gullet and the glottis. We have the tongue. And then we have the maxillary teeth. And then we have the vomerine teeth. If we go on the outside, we have the nictitating membrane and the tympanic membrane. And that's the introduction to the external parts of the frog. If we take a look at the inside of the frog, once we get it cut open, one of the first organs you're going to notice is the three-chambered heart that receives and pumps blood. They have a right atria, a left atria, and a ventricle. So that's three chambers. The only problem with three chambers, is we're going to see in the next slide here, is that the blood has a tendency to mix. The right atrium takes in blood that doesn't have oxygen. The left atrium takes in blood that does have oxygen, but the ventricle pumps both. So we'll see how that works in the next slide here. Here we have the right atrium, which is going to bring in deoxygenated blood, the left atrium, which is going to bring oxygenated blood, and it's divided by the septum, so they don't mix there. But down here in the ventricle, you can see there is no septum there, like in ours, okay? In our four-chambered heart, we have a septum. So here comes the deoxygenated blood. Here comes the oxygenated blood. It's coming in from the lungs and from the skin. But then when they get pumped out and they go down to that ventricle, they have a tendency to mix together somewhat. So that's a little bit of a problem compared to our four-chambered heart, where they can keep the oxygenated and deoxygenated blood separate. Another organ you're going to see inside the body is the liver. The liver has 3 lobes, and it produces bile for digestion. Now, bile is an important ingredient for the digestion of fat in the body. So the stomach stores food and begins chemical digestion. So right here's the stomach. And if you look right above the stomach, right in here, there is a little structure called the gallbladder. It looks almost like it's about the size of a pea. And that gallbladder is where the bile is stored that's produced in this liver. And then that bile will deliver it to the intestine and once again help to digest fat. Then we have, from the stomach, it will lead into the small intestine. Now the small intestine, the name can be kind of misleading because it's actually fairly long. For a typical leopard frog, it's about 7 to 12 inches long, and it's coiled around in there. The large intestine, on the other hand, is only about 2 inches long. The reason that this is called the small intestine is because it is a much thinner piece, whereas the large intestine is much thicker, a much wider girth to it. Now, the small intestine is held together by a little filmy piece called the mesentery, which is filled with blood vessels. So as the small intestine begins to break down the nutrients in the food, that mesentery will pick that up from the blood, will take the blood vessels, will pick that nutrients up and move them throughout the rest of the frog. Then any of the food that is not digested will move down into the large intestine and pushed out through the rectum. Now, of course, frogs also need to breathe. Now, they do breathe about 30% of their oxygen in through their skin, but a large amount of their oxygen is brought in through those internal nares and pushed down into the glottis, where they will enter into the lungs, which are a pair of thin-walled sacs that are connected to the mouth through the glottis. They take in that air to provide oxygen for the frog. Now, in this dissected specimen here, we can actually see those lungs inflate. If you look closely, you can see right down in here, I'm going to take this pipette, we're going to push in some air, and you can actually see those lungs inflating. So then, at the rest of the frog here, we can look and we can see these little things along the side. These are called fat bodies, and they are used to store energy. When the frog is getting ready to hibernate, these are much, much larger. And if they're finished hibernation, these are going to be much, much smaller. These fat bodies are just a way for the stored energy when it's not going to eat for a long time during hibernation. In this mesentery, where those blood vessels around I was talking about, there's also a little sliver of an organ known as the pancreas. And this creates digestive enzymes that help during digestion. And also an organ you can't see here that's about the size of a bean, and it's reddish and brown in color, is called the spleen. And this is where blood cells are produced and stored at. Then if we remove those organs, we can actually see the kidneys. The kidneys, they filter out waste from the blood the same way that our kidneys do. And then they create something called urine. And then the urine is pushed down in through the ureter out to the urinary bladder. Now, when it comes to identifying the frog on the outside, we talked about the thumb pads, but on the inside, it's much easier to tell because when it comes to gender identification here, if it's filled with eggs, such as this one down here, these little black things with all the yellow gelatin-like substance on there, those are eggs. And this is the oviduct, which is where those eggs would be pushed out into an area called the cloaca, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then this is the testes, of course, so this is a male, and it's going to produce the sperm, which is also going to be pushed out through the cloaca. So let's talk about that cloaca for a minute. Right back in through here, this is where the cloaca is located. And cloaca, the word actually means sewer. And what empties out through there is the solid waste, the liquid waste, as well as the sperm and the eggs. So it's a multi-purpose organ there. Through that cloaca, you have the sperm, the egg, the urine, and the solid waste all emptying out through there. So let's review here just a little bit. We have right here the liver. Up here we have the heart, which is a 3-chambered heart. Down in here we have some fat bodies, which are used for storing energy. In through here we have the small intestine, and underneath that liver you can see just a little sliver of the stomach. We can't see the lungs up here because they're hidden by the liver, and we can't see other structures down in here such as the kidneys because they're hidden by other structures. So now is your time to go and complete your Google form. You have 8 questions on your Google form. Thank you for listening and have a wonderful day.